out a notification to everyone here when we are live.
All right, thanks everybody. Happy Star Wars days, and may the 4th be with you. Just want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. And I want to just read out our COVID-19 comments before we start our regular council meeting. Due to the coronavirus COVID-19 emergency, the City of Courtenay, with the authority of Ministerial Order M083, Local Government Meetings and Bylaw Procedures COVID-19, has implemented changes to its open council meetings. In the interest of public health and safety, public in-person attendance at council meetings will be prohibited until further notice. Council meetings will be presided by the mayor or acting mayor, with electronic participation by council and staff. Meetings are available for viewing via live web streaming or video recording on the City of Courtenay website, and will start at 1 p.m. during this period. Thanks for that, and we'll start with the adoption of minutes.
Move adoption.
Second.
And I think Councillor Frisch was seconding that. All right, and any questions or comments regarding minutes? And I have Councillor Hillian. Nope. Okay. Sorry, I saw your hand up there, but that might have been from before. All right. Seeing no questions or comments, unless you oppose it, I'm going to accept the minutes for today. And moving right along, we're going to move into staff reports and presentations on development services. The first one we have is Development Variance Permit 2001-1435 Gryphon Drive. And I'm going to hand it over to staff to speak to this. And then once we've had a bit of a discussion, we'll look at motions.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor. So what I'll do is turn this over to Matt Fitzgerald, who can summarize the report and take questions from council.
Thank you through CAO to Mayor and Council. So this first file here today is a zoning variance to reduce the required front yard of an existing house. The variance is a result of an addition to the house's second story, and the support structures would extend into the front yard. Public information meeting was held with no attendees and 2 comments submitted, which are provided in your council report. Staff has assessed this variance as minor and recommend council approves it. Thank you.
Okay. And are there any questions from council? Seeing none, Councillor McCollum, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'm ready to move it. I'll move that based on today's staff report, development variance permit number 2001 23080, or no, sorry, it's 1435 Gryphon Drive. Council approve option 1 and proceed with issuing development variance permit 2001.
Seconded.
All right, thanks to Councillor Hillian for seconding that, and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment. I actually really like the creativity in this this addition here, and I also wanted to point out that I think our front yard setbacks are generally too large anyways. In a conversation I was having with a friend, we noted that when people use their front yards and their houses are a little bit closer to the front of their lot, they tend to create more of a community on their street. So happy to support this. Thanks.
All right, excellent. I don't see any further comments or questions, so I'm just going to poll council. If you could just let me know if you're in favor or opposed, and starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well, so that's unanimous. Thanks, everybody. And next we have development permit with variances for 1908 2800 Arden Road, and I'll pass it over to staff if you'd like to speak to it. And we may have lost someone. Is
Mr.
David
Allen?
I think David Allen may have lost the meeting. So possibly what we can do right now, we were going to get over to the staff. So yeah, Mr. Kushner, if you could help out, Trevor.
Sure, I'll certainly jump in for Mr. Allen, and it's quite easy. I'll pass this over to Matt Fitzgerald to summarize the report and take any questions from council.
Thank you. Through CAO to Mayor and Council. So the applicant proposes an 8-unit apartment development and 2 buildings at 2800 Arden Road. The proposal requires an amendment to an existing covenant on the property, as well as a development permit and associated variances. This property was zoned for multi-unit residential as part of a 2012 proposal. It also involved the subdivision immediately to the east. As part of that process, a covenant was registered on the property to regulate the form and composition and development of the property, which the applicant now proposes to amend as a first step to this approval. And the amendments are as follows. The first is to allow the 8th apartment unit when the covenant specifies that there's a maximum of 7 allowed. The second is to allow 2 fourplexes when the covenant specifies 2 duplexes and a triplex as the building form. And the third is reducing the fence height along the northwest property line. The second part of the proposal is a development permit with variances, which will be considered by council after the public hearing once we bring this back for council's consideration. Public information meeting was held in support of this proposal with approximately 20 people attending and comments summarized in the staff report, which are mostly opposed to what's proposed. Staff are recommending that as a next step, a public hearing is scheduled concerning modifications to the covenant. And then again, after this public hearing occurs, we bring the file back when council could consider the development permit and variances.
All right, thanks very much. And we've got a couple of questions. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks to staff for the work involved. I must say that there's a tremendous amount of work that seems to have gone into this development proposal, and it may reflect the challenges that it presents. I just wanted to note that Mr. Fitzgerald indicated that most of the public submissions were opposed. I didn't actually see any that were in favor. I'm not sure if I missed that. That's my first question.
Yeah, I guess through CAO to Mayor and Council, it seemed like some might have been neutral. That's why I used the word most. It wasn't clear if they're opposed or against, or opposed or for.
Okay, thanks. My first significant question is, it seems that this originally was another development, and we have a rather odd-shaped lot that presents some development challenges. So as an amenity contribution, that's proposed to be given to Habitat to use for social housing. Habitat then declines the use of the property, it seems, because according to the report that we received, the lot is too far from town, too far from schools, too far from bus lines, and therefore not really suitable for the type of developments that Habitat does. And therefore, that plan is waived, and the lot is sold to a new developer who comes forward with this proposal. Have I got that correct so far?
Yeah, through CAO to Mayor and Council, that's correct chronology.
So I'm just wondering if staff have any comment on the process that that was followed to get to where we are today. It seems somewhat unusual that the lot is originally intended for a social housing purpose, and presumably that influenced some of the concessions that the original development achieved. And then when that possibility evaporates, it turns into what has become a somewhat controversial development on this street. I'd be interested in staff's analysis of that.
Yeah, I can certainly take that question because I was involved with a lot of the discussion that happened with both Habitat and the original property owner, original developer. So it was about 2017 as they were nearing completion of the Bearland strata adjacent to this property. And the question of what was going to happen with, at the time, this particular subject property was referred to as Lot 26. The applicant and their agent were adamant the intent was always that this was to be for Habitat for Humanity. So at that time, I met in the McElhaney offices with a representative of Habitat, as well as Chris Gage, the original developer, and we went through what the intent was. Both Mr. Gage and the Habitat representative indicated that that was their intent at the time, that there was strong connections, as I understand it, between Mr. Gage, the original developer, and Habitat, and that was the plan. The covenant was crafted that a failure to, and it wasn't giving them the land, it was to sell it to them at a nominal price. The agreement, the covenant didn't indicate what that price was, but both parties indicated it was 10% below market was what they were looking at. But the covenant was crafted in such a way that if that transaction couldn't happen, then it would revert to our standard amenity contribution policy. So with the lack of interest by Habitat, then we reverted over to the amenity contribution. The covenant was amended, and with the first phase of the Bearland strata, they paid those fees. Whatever development proceeds on this lot, whether it's this particular project or something else, then they would also be subject to those affordable housing contributions.
Thanks very much. I do have some other questions, but perhaps what I'll just say right now is that I have some concerns about the density of this development and the character of the neighborhood it's in, and also the practical implications of putting this many people this sort of distance from schools and transit and such. But I'm certainly not opposed to it going to public hearing, and I'll turn it over to others at this point. Thanks.
All right, and next we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I have some of the same questions. I think the reason that Habitat is indicating that they're not interested in the lot is the same reason that I have the majority of my concerns. There's very poor transportation connectivity for this lot. Of course, if you're driving, it's not terribly far to get to services. I think Quality Foods is under 4 kilometers away by car. But if you were to actually walk that or ride your bike or take a mobility scooter, it would take quite a while. The compound that I was at the development next to it a few weeks ago with my family, and we knew that there was some sort of trail passing off Arden down to Tin Town. It was challenging to find. We went down the subdivision that's in this report next to it. It's fully built out now, and there's absolutely no connectivity on this dead end street. So I can assure you none of these people are walking to the grocery store or riding their bikes. There is a pathway nearby, and I believe it's adjacent to this property. Maybe staff can confirm that. It looks like the starting of a proper path, and it turns into more of a rough trail.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The trail that's immediately adjacent to this one will in the future connect as developments build out in the neighborhood. The trail that connects to the Tin Town area it's really connects through to Tater Place, but then also forks off along the creek in behind Creekside Commons. It is further towards Cumberland Road from this site. So this particular development never had a connection. We did take the first phase of that Bearland strata contribution fees that will go to a future walkway that will connect out towards the parkway, with the long-term intent in the current OCP that there would be a walkway along that corridor. And just maybe while I have the mic, I'll just to clarify for council, we're not rezoning this property. So in terms of density, the zoning is in place, and the developer is permitted to build 7 units. The real change that we're talking about is the change in the form from 2 duplexes and a triplex to 2 fourplexes, and then going from 7 to 8 units.
Yeah, so I can imagine that in 2012 things looked a little differently, and so you know, I don't want to argue with the decisions made at the time, but it is really tough to imagine putting this many people. Oh, am I still going? Because we lost power at this end.
Power just went out.
Can everyone hear me though?
I can hear you.
I don't care if the power went out.
We
So
have lost some people.
I can't read my notes, but I'll still talk. Well, there you go. So I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, if you put in a minimum of 8 cars into here, it's probably going to be okay for Arden Road. But then when you hit Cumberland Road and subsequent intersections in town, it does compound to our transportation problems. So, and with 0 alternative transportation available, the bus certainly isn't going to be going out there anytime soon. And walking and, you know, cycling, I guess it's possible, but you'd have to be extra dedicated to do it. So I see some real issues. My other question would be what the amenity contribution would be if we went ahead with this particular project in terms of maybe parks and recreation, affordable housing. Do we have those numbers?
Ian, can you hear?
Yes, I can. Yeah, it looks like we've lost a few
I'm
people.
back.
Yeah, we've
the
lost power
amenity-
at City Hall, so sorry, Ian. We
Yeah.
lost power, yeah. That's, well, it just
Oh,
came
there
back
it
on.
Sorry, Mayor, I don't know if you caught that. I was just asking a question about what the contributions would be for this site if the project went ahead in terms of parks and recreation and affordable housing.
Yeah, so if they were to build the exact plan that they've proposed, we're looking at a total of $5,000 contributed to each of those funds.
Per unit?
No, in total. So there's 2 smaller units that are 767 square feet at the bottom, and that's in each building. So each one of those, they contribute $500, and then $750 for each of the larger units on the upper floors.
And I don't know if we have staff here to answer this, but what would it cost to finish that trail connection off that was started off Arden that goes towards both Tater Place and Tin Town?
So if I might be able to turn this over to Trevor Kushner. I don't know if he'll have a number at hand though.
I think Trevor may be off the line right now.
Yeah, I don't think he made it back.
I can say though that the connection, the short portion of trail that's constructed now dead ends because it hits private property. And unless that property were to develop, well, when that property develops, we'd acquire the land. Otherwise, at this point, we'd be in negotiation to purchase the land with the property owner.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll pass it off to someone else, but at this point, I'd really like to get some more information before moving forward on this one. Thanks.
Okay. And Councillor McCullum.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my first question was around the rural designation of the of Arden Road in this area. It was mentioned in the staff report that it's rural arterial, which I assume means that there's no sidewalk facilities, or that explains the nature of the road construction. And my question is, at what point does the changes on this end of Arden lead us to change the classification? Because this is definitely not a rural development, 8 units on 1 lot. And neither is the Bearlands strata that's at the end of the road. And I think to the street that I live on now, that's definitely not a rural road in any way, and has a multi-unit strata up at the top and is fully built out, but my section of road also doesn't have sidewalks. And I'm looking at this, and at least where I live, the road's wider and there's room for parking and to get out of the way and whatnot. But I see doing development like this on a rural designated road as a further cost to the city, because at some point there's going to be a need to put, sorry, this is flashing and distracting me. There's going to be a need to add sidewalks for safety. There's a mention of a daycare at the end of this road, and if we do have connectivity to the trail system that we're talking about, there's nowhere for pedestrians to be. There's roads that connect off of it, and it's a long straight street, which leads to speeding. And I'm just wondering what the process is there for making improvements for pedestrian travel.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think really to make that change is an amendment through the OCP process that's currently underway. The history of that is through the Arden local area plan. The community there didn't want to see curb gutter, sidewalk, streetlights along the entirety of that Arden stretch. The plan still does, and this property was already zoned at that time, but the plan still does call for increased density along the Arden corridor. So it is a challenge for sure. It's not, the shoulders there aren't very wide, but that's the standard that was set through the local area plan process. So if it's something that the neighborhood wanted to revisit, we'd do that through the OCP.
And so the local area plan that designates that road as rural is actually more recent than these development changes at the end of Arden. Is that right?
That's right. And I don't have the dates right in front of me, but this particular application was made in 2010, approved very early in 2012. The Arden LAP, I started with the city in 2012, and it was, I'm guessing, about 2014-ish. When that was completed.
Okay. And then the other question I had was just around the form of this development, and that the original covenant calls for the duplexes and triplex layout. And then there's mention that it's just not feasible with the shape of the lot. If we were to make no changes to the covenant, what would the allowable development, or what would be the options for the developer in terms of number of units? And yeah, would it still be possible for them to do 7 units without making these changes?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the perspective of the developer and their agent and the comments that are in the report, and the plan is shown on page 36 of the agenda, the initial concept. It has 2 duplex buildings more or less in the same spot as what is proposed today. Maybe shifted a little bit, and then the triplex at the bottom of the site. And what the developer is saying is that if you look at the dimensions that are shown in the plan, sort of the 15 feet from the property boundary, 20 feet driveway, and so on, that you add all those up with the width of the duplexes, there's not physical width on that lot to build there in that configuration. In fairness, this is just a sketch plan, so they may not have at that time paid that much attention, but I think smaller duplexes up along Arden Road and a triplex in the bottom would still be feasible. There may be challenges as well with the units at the bottom of that slope in terms of getting access to the services that are on Arden Road. Likely that would require pumping of the sanitary sewer.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
All right, and Councillor Morin, and I think we're all back now. So I know City Hall got disconnected a couple of times there, but I think we're all back. Councillor Morin.
Yeah, thank you. I think most of my questions have been answered, but yeah, upon initial looking at this, and all the opposition, it just doesn't seem like a great fit for this area for a lot of the reasons that have been mentioned already. So I noticed in the report that a public hearing is not mandatory, but there had been public process in the past, so the public hearing is recommended this time. Is that correct?
Thanks for the question. That's correct. There's no, because it's not a rezoning, there's no legislative requirement for a
Right.
public hearing. But because the covenant was put on as part of a public process in zoning in the past, it's the recommendation of staff that we follow the same public hearing process to change it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again. So I think I was pretty clear the first time, but I just did want to clarify that I actually think the design of this project is actually pretty creative, and I like it quite a bit. Unfortunately, I think the location is just a whole lot less than ideal. And as we move forward, I think it is important for the developers to think about transportation, because it's as we're looking at our new OCP, it's probably at the top of the list of things we're trying to focus on right now. And something I've been hearing from people since I started in politics was that there's a real interest in our community to keep our rural neighborhoods rural and to densify at the core. And unfortunately, the end of Arden Road currently doesn't classify as the core of Courtenay. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to just clarify the decision we're being asked to make tonight, which, as I understand it, is whether or not to go to public hearing in relation to this covenant being amended. That would be the key and only question at the public hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The decisions around the variances that are required to side yards, for example, would be considered at a future meeting. The first step would be amending the covenant, because if, for example, the covenant council decided not to amend the covenant, then the plan changes on behalf of the developer.
All right, and the covenant speaks to the issue of 7 units versus 8. I believe it also speaks to the fence. And what's the third issue that it speaks to?
Jump in there.
Sorry, there's the form of the units, the 2 duplexes and a triplex.
Right.
Yeah, the 7 versus 8. And then the fence is one that's a little bit unclear. The plan, again, that the concept was based on didn't show the fence going all the way to the back property line. The developer is proposing to build the 2-meter high fence 1 meter off the property line as intended in the covenant, but to end it at the back of the neighbor who has significant concerns with the proposal at the back of his property line.
Right, and although it seems that an initial idea of lowering the height of the fence and changing it from a concrete fence, it seems that the developer backed away from that and now is adopting a conciliatory approach with the neighbor. So maybe there's a compromise there, but essentially what you're saying is we're stuck with the density, but if we maintain the covenant, then the form changes and the developer would need to go back to the drawing board.
That's correct. The zoning's in place for multifamily development. The covenant specifies what that should look like. If the developer were, say, to build a triplex and a duplex up facing Arden Road, that would be consistent. He'd only be at 5 units, but he'd still be consistent with the intent of the covenant. I think it would require more analysis on those units at the bottom of the hill and the elevation of the sanitary sewer and the road, and then the cost of pumping up to that in terms of if they, if they wanted to do 2 duplexes up front and a triplex at the bottom.
Thanks. But in terms of the primary issues that have been spoken about today, the density and this being out of character with the neighborhood, it seems that we're stuck with that because it already has that zoning.
Correct.
Right. I wanted to ask another question in relation to a public hearing. I understand from the latest report from the province that allowances have been created for municipalities to hold the electronic public hearings. And I'm just wondering if we go ahead with this, and I know there are other projects coming along, if staff has put their mind to how we might conduct a hearing, what that might look like, and how soon we might be in a position to move forward with that process.
I'll weigh in on that if I might, through the mayor. So the mayor and I actually were on a phone call with Minister Robinson the week before last on Thursday, last Thursday, where she mentioned that those changes were coming. At the time of the completion of this report, the details hadn't been forthcoming from the province, so I decided that in consultation with Ian and his staff that we would leave the recommendation the way it shows up in the current report. But since then, we've received a memo from Don Lidstone, who is provided clarity from his perspective on what those requirements are going to be. Staff have not yet had a full discussion on that. We're aware of I just sent the memo out to Ian and a few other senior staff this morning. And so we're still digesting it and trying to figure out what the preferred approach would be given the new, I guess, releasing of certain requirements and the allowing of electronic meetings and written submissions. So Ian, I'll turn it over to you or to Matt for any other comments.
Yeah, I'll just quickly weigh in from my perspective. I fully agree with the CAO's comments. I think now that we have the formal direction from the province, we want to find out what's going to work best for the city. And that will involve a bit of discussion with IT staff. We've had some back and forth, and then figuring out notices and Don Lidstone has some comments around that, but how we properly invite the public to a Zoom meeting, it can be challenging. I mean, we've seen that with our own meetings, but we want to make sure before we go down that route that we have a solid and decent plan behind us.
Okay.
I was just going to add.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, if I may add, I think Doug was saying that there was 3 elements to the covenant. I believe the third element to the covenant was the development proposal locates all driveways accesses in excess of 4.5 meters from the north property line. I think that was the third element that Doug was referring to. Good.
Okay. All right. Next we have Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think in terms of the public hearing, in light of quite a bit of interest and opposition in the neighborhood, whatever we can do to make that opportunity for feedback as accessible as possible would be great. And while I appreciate that there is some density already there, I just want to make sure to acknowledge that folks in that neighborhood, I mean, it's on the border really of regional district and city, and it is probably a place where most people enjoy that kind of more rural feeling. So whatever I think, I mean, can be sort of acknowledged in that way to minimize and the kind of the impact. And also this is far away from services and transportation and all of that as well. So I think whatever we hear from the public on this, we need to also consider that this is sort of a more rural flavor of neighborhood. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again, Mayor. I'm not sure we should send this at this point to public hearing. I don't think it's a strong application, but what I think we should do is put out some ideas for this developer to help him succeed if he really wants to do a development out here. Something that I think would interest me is seeing a more rural feel to the development in general. It might be fewer units. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things he could do to achieve that. I don't know what the numbers look like, obviously. And the other important piece is it's sort of a middle ground, but if there is a bit more density than you would normally find on a lot out there, maybe we find some amenity contribution and work with those private landowners to make that trail a reality. If you go directly, and I've walked the trail, it's pretty rough walk right now, but if it was made a proper pathway, you'd be taking a walk to Tin Town to under 500 meters, and you'd be taking a walk to Quality Foods to around 2 kilometers. So reasonable distances if the neighborhood can get on board with a few more units than is currently acceptable, I guess, supposedly by the people who live there now. Thanks.
And Councillor McCullum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, this application as it stands right now, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around how a public hearing would make us more enthusiastic about moving along in this direction. It's also not lost on me that a lot of the commentary that the neighbors had around it and what they didn't like is probably, even if we don't make any changes and they were to do exactly as the covenant says, I think some of that opposition would still be there. But that also leaves us with an issue that we have a public hearing, and perhaps some of these changes aren't that significant, but it really gives the impression that we haven't listened to the public. And so I'm really not keen on the idea of proceeding with this as it is, because I don't think it's a good fit for the neighborhood, and it's hard to imagine how we're gonna have neighbors on side. And perhaps by not making these recommendations, we will be able to get an application back that is lower density. Maybe it is just 2 units at the front of the property, and they let go of the third one that's shown at the back. And I do like Councillor Frisch's suggestion of maybe some communication with the developer on trying to come up with a solution that is more fitting for the neighborhood, because it's really hard to imagine how these 8 units aren't going to have at least 1 to 2 cars of car dependence, just based on the lack of services in the area. So yeah, I don't think I would like to see this move forward at this point.
Okay, Mr. Allen. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I guess I'd like Ian or Matt or both to clarify the next steps. If the proponent who already has zoning, for certain density decides to come back with a development that requires no variances, what kind of leverage does council have to have the developer reconsider their proposal?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think it's a good point, Mr. Allen. We really, if they go back to just what the covenant says, or a lower density, all it is a development permit application. There would be no ability to negotiate anything. I mean, we can always ask, but reality is there's no lever or hook to tie an amenity contribution to go beyond what's there. So it'd just be a straight development permit under the current zoning.
And if we were to proceed at this point, I mean, is that really all that we have in hand, is to go back to the neighborhood and say that we received these amenity contributions, or do you see that there would be the opportunity to change what's on the table in some way after a public hearing?
Yeah, I think after the public hearing, if the desire still wasn't there, and I think you're right, I believe, and I wasn't here at the time, but that there was a lot of opposition to the multifamily zoning of this property in that 2010 to 2012 time period, and that's what led to the current covenant that's on there. So I do think you're right. The neighborhood's unlikely to come out in support. There's going to be opposition when you go to talk to them. But again, removing the public hearing process and just sticking with the zoning and covenant, that could be done entirely at an administrative process of just issuing a DP. I don't think the developer, the one extra unit that he's essentially negotiating through trying to change this covenant, isn't going to be a lot of value to try and get any significant improvements in the neighborhood. I'll just add, I think it is something both Matt and I have discussed at a staff level, is we are seeing a couple of requests to change covenants that have been registered. And it may be something that we want to discuss with council in the future and bring forward. I don't know what the right word is, moratorium or some clarity on whether we proceed with applications like this. It's always easier if you have zoning in place and you follow all of the zoning guidelines, the setbacks, the development permit requirements. Same thing with the covenant. You follow what's in the covenant, and your path to completion should be a lot simpler than what this applicant's facing today.
Thanks. Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Okay. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that I have worked with this developer in the past, and he's very down to earth. I think he's very easy to work with, and with the feedback, I would suggest that he might be willing to help us, get the neighborhood a little more on board and to achieve some of our transportation goals. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, Councillor Theos.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I believe that moving forward to the public hearing and having communication about the covenant will enlighten us on some issues of how we can move forward with this particular location, as challenging as it is, in the best possible way. So I would be in favor of moving to that public hearing and learning as much as we can about how we move forward with this location. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think I share many of the concerns that this is, while the development, if you just look at the housing type is good, it's just not an appropriate place for that kind of density. And obviously the rural character of the community is not reflected in that, which is why there has been universal lack of support for this development by the community. I, at this point, find myself in supporting Councillor Frisch's suggestion that we go back to the developer and see if it's possible to put together a project that has more local support. At this point, I think if we were in a position of going to a public hearing, I doubt that we're going to hear anything significantly different from the stakeholders than we've already heard. So I think perhaps seeing if we can start fresh with something which has greater possibility of finding local support would be a better way to go.
Okay, and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. In my experience, oftentimes developers who are facing the likelihood of a proposal being turned down will become imaginative and bring forward new ideas. However, that can actually be helped by the type of dialogue that goes on at a public hearing. And given that the only thing we appear to have any control over here is the actual covenant, I would favor going through the process and hearing what the local citizens have to say, and presumably the applicant or the proponent would also speak at that time and have an opportunity to express what they see as their limitations or other possibilities to council in that sort of a formal manner.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morin.
I was prepared to make the motion, actually. If there's no other speakers.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and make a motion, we can put that on the table and debate that. Absolutely.
Okay. I'll move that based on the May 4th, 2020 staff report entitled Development Permit with Variances number 1908, 2800 Arden Road, Council approve option 1 and complete the following steps. That Council, one, that Council direct staff to schedule a public hearing for the requested modifications to covenant CA 675-2425 when regular council meetings resume, or an alternative public hearing format is authorized by the province and approved by council. And 2, that a final decision on development permit with variances number 1908, 2800 Arden Road be withheld until covenant, CA 675-2450 is modified to permit the proposed development.
Second that.
Excellent. Did you want to speak to that, Councillor Moran?
I would just say that I kind of agree with what everybody's saying, and I do think that having the public feedback is important to perhaps help massage this proposal a little bit, to see if anything can be done to make it work better. So that's all I'll say about it, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, will there be an opportunity then for the developer to, I mean, maybe they're sitting watching the meeting right now, but will there be an opportunity for staff to have a little bit of dialogue and express the concerns brought up by council, giving them the opportunity to come back with a slightly different plan before the public hearing?
Ian or Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. I expect if they're not watching it now, they or their agents will watch it. We'll have that conversation at a staff level, express the concerns, encourage them if they haven't watched it to watch the video and take the dialogue into account. I think if they would then make the decision if they want to modify designs prior to proceeding to public hearing, we could come back to council and at least make you aware of that the public hearing will be delayed based on that. Or they may want to just proceed with the proposal they have and see what happens.
All right, thanks very much.
Excellent. And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, this is a kind of another question around the public hearing process, but given that this doesn't even necessarily fit what we would normally consider at a public hearing and just what the limitations are here that council has in front of us, is there an opportunity at the public hearing to really expand on that communication for the neighbors, and so that the neighborhood is clear on what council can and cannot do with this application?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're limited to some degree on how much information we can put in a notice in the newspaper. So we'll have to wrap our heads around that. We could, at least at the public hearing, have an introductory statement prepared by staff that clarifies those things. So at the time of the public hearing, that would be aware. It's always nice if we can get out in front of that in advance, but we'll do our best to prepare something.
Great, yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
Mr. Allen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to I guess, ask staff if engaging with the proponent might lead to them, as Councillor Frisch and others have pointed out, being willing to amend their proposal prior to going to public hearing, where they can anticipate a lack of enthusiasm, perhaps. It might be better for the proponent to try and be proactive and have that discussion with staff, and then look at the option of coming back to council prior to engaging in the public hearing process as well. So six of one, half dozen of the other, but I just wonder if there's any comments from staff on that.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like I say, it's really going to be up to the applicant whether they want to amend things or proceed. We have encouraged throughout the process, and we always do, to try and work with the neighborhood and find compromise. There have been a few meetings with the immediately adjacent neighbor. They've, I think, found some compromise, but still aren't on the same page. So as I said earlier, we'll have that discussion for sure with the applicant, encourage them to watch this discussion, and then they'll be able to make their best decision going forward.
Okay, and Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that after listening to the comments by Mr. Buck, it seems that if we were to proceed with the public hearing, this would give us two opportunities to have influence over the shape of the development, one in the time between now and a public hearing and the other afterwards. And if staff are going to have ongoing discussions with the developer, even if a public hearing is set in the meantime, then I think I might support a public hearing because it allows us two separate opportunities, both before and after, to try and have some influence over the shape of the development. So I think I'll probably at this point, having heard all the discussion, I think I may end up supporting the public hearing.
Okay, thanks very much. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two final comments. Number one, I believe that a number of the residents in their statements indicated that they understood the density that was already there in terms of the zoning. And even though they may not like that, what they seem to be objecting to was the even increased density of moving from 8 units to 7. It may not seem like much to us, but I think there's a symbolic value to it. And from their perspective, a couple of extra cars. The other issue that I think we perhaps didn't address was the scale of the development and the immediate neighbor's concern that it would dwarf his property just in terms of the height. And I don't know whether any sort of variation of that is contemplated. It seems that discussions along those lines didn't get anywhere, but those are the sorts of things that I think we might hear more about at a public hearing, and so I'm happy to support that going forward. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any further questions or comments, and I think we had a pretty fulsome discussion. I think at the end of the day, we're looking at a development that may not be perfect, and so yeah, I think having that public hearing to have some discussion and seeing what possibilities are is certainly a way forward. I think from the developers, I don't want to speak for them, but I mean, they've come in possibly even thinking that we would want more densification, considering that's been a common theme. But again, location can be a bit of a challenge. So having said that, I'm going to poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Thanks very much for the great discussion. And again, I think this year gives everyone the opportunity to watch this afterwards and sort of see where the concerns were. Fantastic. All right. Under financial services, Councillor Frisch. Or did you want to speak?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks, Mayor. I'll go ahead and move option 1, that council approve borrowing from the Municipal Finance Authority of BC as part of the 2020 fall borrowing session, $3 million. That is authorized through the 2020, sorry, my children's pop-ups are now coming up on my computer. There we go. As authorized through the 2020 Greenwood Trunk Connection Sanitary Sewer Capital Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2985/2019, and that the CVRD be requested to consent our borrowing over a 25 term and include the borrowing in a security issuing bylaw.
Second.
All right. Thanks very much. Is there any, or I'll pass it over to staff, I think. Mr. Allen?
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So really, this really deserves a bit of, I think, celebration perhaps, because this has been a a capital project that has been hanging out there for several years. In fact, I think it was on the radar when I showed up back in 2013. And there was some frustration that hadn't made its way through the regional district. Subsequently, it did, and was recently their portion of the work, the capital work was done. We've recently, the tender has closed for this project. And it's something that is absolutely essential if there's to be continued development in East Courtenay, whatever that looks like. And so what I'd like to do is just to, first of all, say that, and it's in the report, I think it's actually in the draft loan authorization bylaw, but it's a $4.1 million budget, and you're looking at $3 million in potential borrowing. But it looks like we've had some very positive responses that are below budget. So what I'd like to do is just to, before we go to Jennifer Nelson, who really is the author of the security issuing resolution report, turn this over to Trevor Kushner, who can speak a little bit more in more detail on the operating aspects of this capital project.
Great, thank you. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council. Like David mentioned, I think it's an excellent example of a really good news story. And I think it's really about two main factors. One is about the importance of completing design prior to going to tender. It takes all the variables out of a potential tender process. And I think the other key important factor is timing. We were able to, as we recall, council approved the design last year. We completed that design and we were able to get out ahead of the construction timing, which is typically May and June. We were out running our tender process in parallel with the AEP process back in January. What that allowed us to do was get some incredible pricing. We had a total of 7 bids. Happy to announce that Leighton Contracting, a local company, has got the tender. The tender amount is $2.9 million. There are some other costs and whatnot, contingencies, but right now we're projecting a potential of $750,000 savings. So I think it's an excellent example of some great work by finance and some great work by Mr. Ward's group and of course by Chris Davidson's group in terms of the tender and procurement.
Fantastic. Thanks for the great news. Really appreciate it. And we do have a couple of questions and comments, so maybe I'll pass it over to Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I was actually just going to say thanks to staff. And in my recollection, this was a lot of hard work done by our staff in the past to move the process along, and of the previous sewage commission that also had a part to play. So thanks very much.
Excellent. And Mr. Allen, did you want to speak again?
No, just to say myself, I appreciate the efforts that have come from across departments to get us to this point. And it's pleased that, of course, we hope for a good competitive price. Obviously, the pandemic may have had something to do with that, which we have no control over. But nonetheless, I think this kind of an approach is proven its worth, and hopefully will continue to do so as we get detailed design completed in the prior year and get out early in the tendering season to get the most competitive pricing. So that's really all I wanted to add.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And again, I think great news all the way around in terms of getting the project as far as we have, great on the price. And again, you know, it's going to have a great impact in terms of moving stuff around. So that's awesome. I think it's been moved and seconded. So I'll just poll council. I just want to look to Mr. Richta. Are we good to poll council? Okay. So we'll start with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Enthusiastically in favor.
There you go. And I'm in favor as well. So excellent. So that's unanimous. Fantastic. All right. Moving right along. Next, Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move a resolution related to housing and support services. Whereas there continues to be a significant homeless population in the Courtenay area, whose presence in unsupported settings and unsanctioned campsites creates risks related to health and safety, including fire, environmental hazards, and unhygienic conditions that, according to health officials, increase the risk of COVID-19 transmission. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Courtenay work with the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness to present a proposal to the provincial government for funding to address these risks through the provision of temporary housing and related support services.
Second.
And if I could speak to that, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
as you know, you've been approached, a number of us have been approached by advocates and those who work with these issues in response to the situation that we found ourselves in, where the pandemic has perhaps emphasized the risks present in this population. And I'm advised that apart from the campsites that we know about and the situations where people are sleeping rough, that there are also people living unsupported in motels through income assistance and other means in close quarters and without the support services that would ensure optimal health and welfare. And on this basis, I believe we've been waiting a significant amount of time. It's come up at nearly every briefing of the Emergency Operations Center, whether or not there is a provincial plan forthcoming. We've seen planning take place in our larger urban centers, and we have the sense that maybe there's something coming, but perhaps we can help that process along by using the documentation that the Coalition to End Homelessness has and presenting a specific proposal to the province that would indicate both the numbers that we would potentially be looking at housing and the facilities, private, public, or otherwise, that we might be able to use. I think we could present such a brief report in the context of a letter to the province within fairly short order, and hopefully spur some action that would benefit both the individuals involved and the larger community that is impacted by this. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Hillian. And yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, we've been talking to the province since basically March, probably 17th, I think was in the first, one of the first meetings that we had with the telephone call with the province. And you know, basically at the same time, having conversations with Andrea Capelli from the Homelessness Coalition here in the Comox Valley. And those conversations have continued on, and there have been assurances that it's being worked on. But as you said, by stepping forward and saying this is something that we know we need in our community, and we, I think, are really well positioned with the Homelessness Coalition to know really what needs to happen, how it can happen. When I was talking with Richard Clark sometime in the last week, I mean, they've done some costings and stuff. So I think that puts us in a really good position in terms of knowing what we need, so that we can be a little bit more specific and help the province right now as they're, you know, really trying to write the manual as they go along. So I do see we got a couple of comments, Mr. Allen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So fortunately, I had an opportunity. It was scheduled a couple of weeks ago, and for various reasons, we couldn't get the conversation going between Heidi Hartman from BC Housing and myself until actually this morning at 11 o'clock. And it was a good discussion, and I think timely in terms of this resolution. A couple of key points that I took out of the meeting was that BC Housing is, of course, inundated with many similar requests and is mindful of the challenge of not playing favorites, even though, of course, they're doing their own triage and looking at where the greatest need is. And that's why the initial response has been in Victoria and Vancouver, the Lower Mainland. So they are keen to partner with communities. They're very flexible based on the needs and the capability of each community. One of the things that Heidi pointed out is that the capacity does vary greatly between communities, and that one of the biggest challenges is the organizational capacity of the volunteer organizations like the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, who she thought were well positioned, compared to many other smaller communities, and being able to support moving forward on this basis. They've also, as I think all of you know, been doing a lot of work on pre-planning. I think part of the misinformation that may be out there, the lack of cross pollination in the information, is led to some frustration, understandably, and I think that's being resolved now. One of the things, though, that I found quite interesting, and I didn't realize this, is that the focus on having hotels and motels available is of course related to those vulnerable people, the homeless folks who are showing either symptoms of COVID-19 or have actually tested positive. But Heidi did note that there's no power to force people to self-isolate, even if they've tested positive. So that's something that I found quite surprising. So we need to keep that in mind. The other thing is that funding right now, and this could change, we've seen things change on a weekly basis with the provincial and federal announcements. It's only committed to the end of June of this year. So June 30th is when the current provincial funding goes to. So we need to be mindful of that, not to stop any initiatives or support in terms of providing additional housing or what have you. But if we look to use civic facilities like they have in Nanaimo, and Heidi actually forwarded me on a link which I can send you, or you could probably find it yourselves, but it's an announcement Thursday of last week that Nanaimo's found a civic facility that they're actually using to house people who haven't necessarily are not symptomatic or haven't tested positive, but provides that place for them to go. She also mentioned that in fact there's still vacancies in the current shelter spaces that are available in the valley. So that's one of the things they also look to. But the flip side of that is that by demonstrating the political will to move forward with providing some supports, I think that puts the city in a better position if they hadn't. The biggest issue, as I say, is staff and resource capacity. So I would suggest that, obviously we'll have to work, and this affects primarily Courtenay. The encampments are primarily within the Courtenay boundary. There is some spillover, but I think it's going to be important for operational staff, administrative staff, to work closely with through the EOC and also directly with the Comox Valley Coalition and Homelessness to assist them. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks very much, and glad you're able to touch base with Heidi. Yeah, I know the meeting seemed to kind of go around and around, but I think the province, in their defense, has been fairly open and communicative with people. I know Andrea has said that she's had a conversation or two with Heidi as well. So glad to see that the people on the front line, so to speak, are able to be part of this conversation as well. Councillor Moore, you had your hand up as well.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm happy to see this resolution come forward from Councillor Hillian, and I really like the piece around including related support services. I know, I had a chat about how that's often the missing link in these situations, is having the support services to go with this, and it's possibly why other communities have been having some problems when they've been putting folks up in hotels and motels, etc. If they don't have the folks from the agencies to help them out. And I know with Dawn to Dawn, that's, I'm not committing them to anything, but that is something that they do already with kind of being that middle person with landlords, et cetera. So there might be some opportunities there because I think, you know, people do, if, you know, you can put someone in a room, but if you don't have someone sort of checking in and maybe helping out with other things that they need and being a little bit of a watchdog as well, then everything kind of breaks down. So I appreciate that wording in there, and very in support of the motion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor Morin. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to add, I'd be happy to, as council's representative on the Coalition to End Homelessness, to follow up with the coalition members who are a bit aware of this resolution coming forward and bring the material and work with staff on a letter that we would send forward. I would see trying to minimize the amount of extra staff work that this would create, and also firmly committed that for us to move forward in this, it really does require provincial support funding and not the expenditure of further city resources. And I think that needs to be inherent in anything that we may be able to do that helps to address this situation. Thank you.
Awesome. And again, thanks, Councillor Hillian, for taking this on. I know there's been many conversations over the last month or almost, well, I guess we're on the 13th. We'll be kind of 2 months in, which is coming up fairly quickly. So, you know, really want to thank you for the work you've done with the Homelessness Coalition and taking on this motion. And I think this is, you know, one of the things where, you know, trying to make sure we're keeping communication even amongst our council and staff is as relevant and focused as possible, so that there are things that we can be doing, that we are trying to bring these things forward. So I don't see any further questions or comments. I'm going to poll council on this letter, and starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. I expected something more exciting from you, Councillor Theos, but we still have one more thing to go over. So, so thanks everybody, and again, thanks to staff for the work you've been doing on this file. You know, again, I think we've done pretty good getting the washrooms open, getting the showers going. It sounds like there's a big uptick in usage, so that's great that we're able to provide some of those services. But again, seeing if there's ways that we can partner with the province to maybe get this to a sort of the next level. So next we have new business, and Councillor Theos, over to you.
I move receipt, and if I could speak to it afterwards, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
I'll second that.
All right. And Councillor Theos, if you'd like to speak.
Yes, you know, and I'll show this excellent enthusiasm that you were just referring to. So, on the last election trail, this issue about Santa Dump, it actually did come up about a half a dozen times, and there was some very eager residents to express to me how important having a Santa Dump is for tourism, RVs, and people that want to come through Courtenay that are lacking that service right now after the one that was here had closed. So I am very ecstatic to see that this conversation is on the table. How's that?
Fantastic. Yeah, no, Santa Dumps are very exciting. So lots of people want to comment on it right now. Councillor Morin, you have something to add?
Whoops, I unmuted myself. Yeah, I was just going to sort of echo what Councillor Theo said, that I've had several people talk to me about this. So I'm happy to see this come forward for discussion. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And Councillor Theos, did you have something to add? Oh, me. I can't hear you anyways. We'll move on to Councillor.
Yeah, I apologize. It came on by accident.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to say how pleased I was with this letter. It's true initiative, really. Someone sees an issue in the valley and actually takes the time to come up with some positive opportunities to solve it. And I wonder what staff thoughts are on this. I think this actually might fit in really well at the Sewage Commission, because we do deal with water, bulk water on a regional scale, and something like this might make more sense at the commission. I just wonder if we would find support from Courtenay's staff in partnering on this, because I think the location of it would make a lot of sense being in Courtenay.
Yeah, and I think that follows the conversation Mr. Allen and I had. Did you want to speak to that, Mr. Allen, at all?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. I think I'm not clear on, we haven't had a lot of discussion at the staff level, other than we know that this has been an issue that's been out there for quite a while. And it's a reasonable issue to bring up. I mean, it's of importance. I might just turn this over to Trevor Kushner to speak from his perspective, because of the operational sort of implications of going forward. But I do believe that it is also very much connected to economic development and tourism.
And thank you through the CEO to Mayor and Council. Councillor Frisch, you're exactly right. If you look at the last page 107 of the agenda, the letter writer, who by the way happens to be a retired city employee who knows the infrastructure very well, he makes reference to the fact that it's a regional issue, and that's what staff's perspective is that this would be an excellent example to send to the Sewer Commission for potential deliberation and inclusion in their 2021 capital project, because the issue is that it's difficult to find locations in an urban setting like ours that can allow for the long vehicles, and it's not quite as simple as just collecting to the sewer system or connecting to it. You have to have gray water and black water tanks that you have to operate and maintain, and the operation can be quite onerous over time. So I would suggest that it's a perfect regional initiative.
Okay, well, when we're done receiving it, I might suggest that we do move to forward it on to the commission. I guess I'm just wondering who's going to do the bulk of the work if we do find support to do something like this. Would it be regional district staff, or, I mean, I think obviously it would include the city staff if it ends up being in our area. And what sort of capacity do we have to tackle this issue over the next, year or two or whatever?
Mr. Allen?
Yeah.
And not forget about my bike lanes.
Oh, well, that's impossible. We could never forget about those. I think this is an ideal thing to bring up through the Sewage Commission. Clearly, from an administrative standpoint and a senior staff perspective, we can deal with this through the Sewage Advisory Committee. And so it spreads, pardon the pun, it spreads the load across the service and allows us to look at it from a regional perspective. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thanks for the pun.
Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Like others, I've been hearing about this issue for a number of years, and actually had one proposal from a resident that we go a step further than creating a sandy dump for recreational vehicles, and actually create a recreational vehicle park so that people would overnight here and spend money in local shops rather than carrying on to regions further north on the island. And I'm just wondering, I note that the letter writer has indicated that he plans to speak with the Chamber of Commerce. I wonder if there might not be a business opportunity here for someone to create just such an opportunity. And I'm not 100% clear whether this is a public sector responsibility or a private sector responsibility. It's not that there aren't places that exist that people could use, but they tend to be in awkward locations to find, as the letter writer points out. So I would certainly support a regional solution, but I'm also interested in whether there's a business opportunity here for someone. Thanks.
All right. Did staff want to respond to that at all, or do you think it's encapsulated going to the
I think we can keep this in mind as we go forward in discussions with the regional district. Obviously, there's the economic, potential economic benefit associated with this and attracting people and all of that. So I think we understand what we need to know, but again, I'll turn it over to Trevor to, just in case there's any other information that staff might want before engaging with the regional district on this.
Yeah, I would just add that it's not uncommon to have a third-party contractor run a sewage facility like this on behalf of a regional district or municipality, but the first step is clearly getting a facility built in a regional setting so that it can be funded by all the partners who get benefit from it.
Okay, and Councillor Frisch.
Thank you. Councillor Hillian's comment made me think of something I just put on the record and share with you, is that the Comox First Nation, of course, is doing upgrades to their campground, and they might be interested in a business opportunity like this. So hopefully at the sewage committee level, they'll have that discussion as well. Thanks, if we send it to them.
Fair enough. Excellent. All right, that being said, I know this was, I think it was just for receipt, so I don't think there's been a motion on this yet. Does that sound correct, Ms. Schritzta? So on receipt, unless you're opposed to it, I'll just assume we're good for receipt. And Councillor Hillian, did you want to make a motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that we request staff to contact the Regional Sewage Commission to further explore this idea.
Second that. Theos.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? I think we had a pretty fulsome discussion. So I guess at this point, if you guys want, we'll poll for the actual motion. So starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
Oh, in favor.
Excellent. Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Very happy to support the motion.
Very, very enthusiastically, and I'm in favor of it as well. So I thanks everybody for the great discussion there. And again, I think a need that needs to be addressed in some form or another. And that just leaves adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Excellent. Anybody opposed to adjournment? Seeing none, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thanks everybody for your time today.